source of the unity of humankind, the generating force that carries forward the complicated affairs of the faith, the transforming power that moves hearts and dashes into 1,000 pieces all the forces of opposition, is the covenant of Baha'u'llah. Abdu'l-Baha wrote, "The axis of the oneness of the world of humanity is the power of the covenant, and nothing else." For 29 years, Abdu'l-Baha was the embodiment of his father's covenant, its appointed center, the branch of command which encompasses all existence. He was the focus of the unifying power of the cause. To the believers, Abdu'l-Baha was the cause. Then suddenly, unexpectedly, he was gone. No words can describe the grief and despair which fell over the Baha'i world. Who would comfort them now? Who would unify and guide them? Who would lead them on the global mission for which Baha'u'llah had called? In his will and testament, Abdu'l-Baha revealed the design for the administrative order and identified his twin successors, the Guardian and the Universal House of Justice. A 24-year-old student, still devastated by the passing of his grandfather, young Shoghi Effendi was appointed by Abdu'l-Baha's will and testament the guardian of the cause of God and interpreter of the Word of God. Abdu'l-Baha made it clear that the election of the Universal House of Justice was the final step in building the framework of the administrative order. First, the cause must spread throughout the world. It must attract a foundation of believers to elect local and finally national spiritual assemblies. Using Abdu'l-Baha's tablets of the Divine Plan as a blueprint for disseminating the cause, and the will and testament as his authority to act, the Guardian began the awesome task of raising up the worldwide administrative order. Martha Root and a band of traveling teachers and pioneers responding to the Master's call traveled throughout the world. Queen Marie of Romania became the first royal personage to declare her faith in Baha'u'llah. Baha'i endowments and properties were purchased throughout the world. Youth activities began in earnest, and Baha'i historic and holy sites were acquired. Completion of the Mother Temple of the West symbolized the obstacles facing the cause. Abdu'l-Baha had personally laid the cornerstone during his visit to Chicago, and from the beginning, Shoghi Effendi was determined to see its completion. By 1937, 8 national spiritual assemblies, pillars of the future Universal House of Justice, had been raised into position. The time had come. The Guardian, armed with a small but devoted body of North American believers, began prosecution of the Master's divine plan. The first 7-year plan was launched. The opening scene, the Guardian wrote, of the first act of that superb drama whose theme is no less than the spiritual conquest of both the Eastern and Western hemispheres. Within 2 years, however, the world was at war. The faith was under renewed attack and repression. The Guardian appealed to the believers in the West. Dare greatly, toil unremittingly, sacrifice worthily, endure radiantly, unflinchingly till very end. Their response was magnificent. By 1944, the number of Baha'i assemblies in North America had doubled. The costly exterior ornamentation of the Mother Temple was completed ahead of schedule, and a strong Baha'i community was established in each of 20 Latin American republics. Inspired by their fellow believers in the West, 95 Persian families left their homes to settle in neighboring lands and join the growing ranks of pioneers. Led by the beloved Guardian, the worldwide body of believers had become God's victorious army of light. And in 1946, Shoghi Effendi, addressing the American Baha'i community, launched the second 7-year plan, followed by a call to the other national communities throughout the Baha'i world to adopt their own teaching plans with specific national goals. These plans would carry the healing influences of the faith to the war-ravaged, disillusioned peoples of Europe. They would consolidate the faith in the Americas and throughout the world, complete the temple, and erect 3 more pillars of the future Universal House of Justice: the National Assemblies of Canada, Central America, and South America. The European campaign fired the imagination of Baha'is all over the world. And despite severe economic hardships, once again, complete victory was won. Exhilarated by these exploits, the Guardian prepared his unbreachable army for the greatest single undertaking in the spiritual history of humanity. Of the 10-year crusade, launched in 1953, he wrote, "Let there be no mistake. The avowed, the primary aim of this spiritual crusade is none other than the conquest of the citadels of men's hearts." To the Baha'i world, even with its newfound sense of confidence, the list of goals must have seemed impossible. Erect 2 new temples, open 131 new territories, elect 48 new national assemblies, and reach millions of new souls, laying the foundation for the election of the first Universal House of Justice. Reflecting the importance of the plan, the Guardian announced 4 great conferences around the globe. Scores of pioneers volunteered at each conference. 100 virgin territories were opened in the first 9 months, and 3/4 of the goal countries occupied. Shoghi Effendi encouraged and mobilized his troops with a constant stream of letters and cables. His enormous body of written work, his books, his translations strengthened and deepened the believers. With the Guardian at the helm, nothing could stop God's army of light. Then suddenly, without warning, dark clouds of crisis covered the horizon. On the 4th day of November, in 1957, from the World Center came the tragic news. Shoghi Effendi, the beloved Guardian, had passed peacefully into the Abha kingdom. The Guardian was gone. The 10-year crusade was only half finished, and the Master's other successor, the Universal House of Justice, had not yet emerged. In this darkest moment, it was the limitless resources of the covenant that sustained, unified, and empowered the believers to forge ahead. The hands of the cause of God, raised up by Shoghi Effendi as the chief stewards of the faith, led the Baha'i world in carrying out his global plan. And by the close of the 10-year crusade, the conquests were complete. In April 1963, at the First Baha'i International Convention, the supreme governing body of the faith was brought into being. A few days later, at the First World Congress in London, England, a worldwide Baha'i community welcomed the newly elected members of the Universal House of Justice. Once again, the protecting power and vitalizing energies of the covenant flowed unhampered through Baha'u'llah's chosen successor. The world community of believers had grown. Local spiritual assemblies numbered over 3,500, and the number of places where Baha'is lived reached in excess of 11,000. In its first message to the national conventions, the Universal House of Justice wrote, "The cause of God is now firmly rooted in the world. Forward, then, confident in the power and protection of the Lord of Hosts." For the next 21 years, the Baha'i Faith moved forward at an ever-increasing pace. The work of the Hands of the Cause was extended into the future by the creation of the Continental Board of Counselors. The International Teaching Center was established. The first head of state, His Highness Malietoa Tanuma Fili'i II of Western Samoa, declared his faith, followed by the erection in his country of the first temple in the Pacific. In 1983, the Universal House of Justice occupied its permanent seat, the soaring pillars symbolic of the 135 national assemblies participating in the election. Some 3 million believers now inhabited the globe. The number of local spiritual assemblies exceeded 27,000, and Baha'is lived in over 116,000 places in the world. The Baha'i Faith was knocking on the door of worldwide attention when the news came. The National Assembly of Iran was arrested and imprisoned. The House of the Bab was seized and destroyed. The persecution of the Persian believers had resumed, full force. National and local assemblies were outlawed, properties confiscated. The House of Baha'u'llah in Takur was destroyed. And once again, the cradle of the faith was stained with the innocent blood of men, women, and youth. Yet it was these very sacrifices that propelled the faith from obscurity. Unprecedented and worldwide media coverage exposed the faith to millions. Governments around the globe came to the defense of the Iranian believers, and the General Assembly of the United Nations for the first time took up the case. In October 1985, the Universal House of Justice published The Promise of World Peace and declared that global peace was the next and inevitable step in the evolution of the planet. As the fourth epoch of the formative age opened in 1986, 138 heads of state had received this important document. The truth of its vision dramatically demonstrated as the Cold War crumbled before the eyes of a peace-starved world. The astonishing Lotus Temple was dedicated in New Delhi. It stands as one of the most important buildings erected in this century. Expansion of the faith accelerated. Eastern Europe and the former republics of the Soviet Union were at last open to the conquering forces of the Covenant. The Brazilian Federal Chamber of Deputies paused for a 2-hour tribute to the Blessed Beauty, which included the reading of a message from the Universal House of Justice. The Holy Year opened with moving ceremonies at the World Center, commemorating the ascension of Baha'u'llah. 3,000 believers circumambulated his shrine. A month later, the Baha'i international community was asked in particular to address the historic Earth Summit. The burgeoning influence of Baha'u'llah's revelation can now be felt in all spheres of human existence. As we prepare for the next stage in the unfolding of Abdu'l-Baha's divine plan, immense and fleeting opportunities call for a level of sacrifice and dedication reminiscent of the Guardian's courageous army of light. Completion of the ark and terraces on Mount Carmel represents the unfolding of a vision of God's holy mountain, which will coincide with the emergence of the lesser peace and the first stirrings of the world order of Baha'u'llah. For 7 long decades, the community of the greatest name has dared greatly, toiled unremittingly, sacrificed worthily, endured radiantly, unflinchingly to the very end. How unimaginably glorious are the victories awaiting God's warriors as they set their faces towards those fields that are as yet unexplored and direct their steps to those goals that are as yet unattained. Comforted and guided always by the words of the beloved guardian. Whatever may befall us, and however dark the prospect of the future may appear, if we but play our part, we may rest confident that the hand of the unseen is at work, shaping and molding the events and circumstances of the world, and paving the way for the ultimate realization of our aims and hopes for mankind.